Podcast categories is something that takes a backseat when it comes to your podcast launch, relaunch, or optimization. In today's conversation, we're diving into just how important categories actually are and how to use them to get your show in front of the right audience. Let's get into it. Welcome back to this week's episode of As It Relates to Podcasting. My name is Simona Costantini, and we are kind of nearing the end of our podcast launch series. Over the last few weeks, almost 10 weeks by the time this series is done, we have covered every single facet, every single thing that you need to know when it comes to your podcast launch, relaunch, or optimization process. Even if you've already launched your podcast, I know there's things in here that are going to be helpful for you to take and to implement in your podcast today so that you can optimize it and you can rank even better in the future. Today's conversation is centered around your categories specifically. You might think that categories are just a checkbox, but the reality is that they're just simply not. Before we dive too much further into it, I do want to share with you my podcast launch blueprint. It is a free download, free guide to take everything that we're talking about over the last 10 weeks or so and help you have it in a concise document in one way where you can just pull all the information that you need to launch, relaunch, or optimize your show. The link for that is in the episode notes below. So let's talk a little bit about podcast categories in and of themselves. You might think that podcast categories are just something that people do to, figure out where their show may lie. But the truth is, this is how Apple and Spotify decide where to rank your show. And also in 2025, they're key to getting discovered by AI search. And we're highlighting it today because a lot of podcasters just kind of scroll through this and the whole process, and they don't really take some time to think about which categories are the best categories for them when they're setting up their show. If you think about it, you may just select business, like my show is a business show, or I'll just pick education and I'm just going to call it a day. But the truth of the matter is, the category that you select is the thing that is telling the algorithm what kind of show you are, but also who to show it to. If you've ever wondered why some podcasts seem to accidentally chart in your niche while others may not even ever break that chart to begin with, it's because they know how to play that category game and they know how to do it strategically. So I'm going to share with you today some simple ways that you can take your podcast categories and optimize them so that you can also reap the benefits that everybody else is who knows how to do this strategically. Today, I'm going to break down how to pick the right categories, how to rank faster in those charts, and how to future-proof your show for AI-driven podcast discoverability. Why do categories matter for ranking? Let's start with this. Your podcast category is the very first signal that platforms like Apple and Spotify and YouTube use to understand your content. I want you to kind of think of this as a book genre at a bookstore. If your book is about entrepreneurship, but you shelve it under self-help, the wrong readers are going to find it, and they may pick it up, they may look at it, they may read a chapter, but they're not going to stay because it's not what they were looking for. I personally find this so frustrating. I like to look for different spirituality podcasts, things about astrology and energy and that kind of stuff. And I remember one time I was searching so hard for this specific type of podcast. I don't even remember what it was, but I couldn't find it. And I couldn't find it in the spirituality category. I couldn't find it in any of the categories that you would think that it would be in. And I was getting so frustrated because I was like, I know that a show like this has to exist. Like there's got to be something like this that exists right now. But I couldn't find it. And I bet you the reason why I couldn't find it is because it wasn't in the right category to begin with. So how the platforms kind of break out is that Apple Podcasts currently allows you to select one main category, and then you get 2 subcategories. And meanwhile, you have something like Spotify that indexes their shows a little bit differently. And what it's doing is it's reading your RSS feed and it's looking at your metadata to match your topic with different clusters, with listener behavior, and even keywords that are used in your transcript. But here's where it gets interesting, right? Because as we continue to grow and evolve, and as technology continues to grow and evolve, both platforms, all platforms are starting to integrate that large language model, LLM search, okay? This is something we've been talking about a lot in the agency. We have a lot of blog posts about it. You can check out our blog if you want to learn about this a little bit more. But what it really means is that AI is listening for context and intent and alignment, and it's reading. And if you call your show a business podcast, but you're mostly talking about mindset or something not related to business and you're talking about it frequently, the system gets confused. So then when you have a listener that says, hey Siri, or, hey Spotify or whatever, find me a podcast about women building personal brands, your show may not appear even though that's the exact thing that you're talking about. And the reason why is because your metadata did not match your message. So selecting categories and using the right categories is how you train the algorithm to recognize you. And when you finally do get it right, you start showing up in all of the places. You show up in the related shows section, in new listener recommendations, and in the curated charts that grow and push your show out into more hands. So if one of your podcast goals towards the end of this year and into the next is growing your podcast, I really want you to take a look at the categories that you're in right now and do they make sense for your show? We're actually doing a podcast rebrand right now, and I went and I looked at their categories that they selected, and all of them were irrelevant to the topics of the podcast. Just that one small tweak can start to put you in the right hands. So I highly recommend take a look at your categories and make sure you're in the ones that you actually want to be in and that are actually relevant to your show. All right, so we've talked a lot about the why behind the categories and why they're important, but let's get a little bit tactical and a little bit tangible. And let's talk about how to pick those 3 categories and how to start getting charted. So with your actual categories, you get 3 opportunities to define your show. The first one is your main category, and then you have 2 secondary ones. And I'm going to share with you how to pick them strategically. Step 1 is leading with your content pillar. So this means, what do you really talk about? Not what you think sounds impressive to other people, but what are your actual episodes covering? What is it that you're actually talking about week after week? So I'm going to give you 3 different examples, okay? If you interview entrepreneurs about growth, business, entrepreneurship, that category should be your main category. If you teach branding or storytelling, you might go into the education courses category or the arts design category. If your show blends mindset and performance, something like health and fitness under the mental health category could be stronger than just putting it under the business category. I want you to remember that the main category you select is the one that appears on the charts. So choose the one where you can actually compete. Choose the one that makes the most amount of sense with the content that you're creating. Now, people think that they need to all go into the main category, like the main business category. And you don't need to be the top 10 in business unless you want to, and that's a goal for you. But there's so many shows that get placed in this category that I am a huge fan of making sure that you're picking subcategories like marketing or management or entrepreneurship. The smaller the category that you're selecting, the more likely that you are to chart and get that visibility. So make sure that you are really selecting the category that makes the most amount of sense, again, for the content that you are creating, okay? So important. The next piece here is using the secondary categories to expand your reach even further. These new categories are kind of like 2 branches that branch out from the main category. So for example, if you have a podcast about business growth, you could use business and entrepreneurship, and then education and how-to, and technology and management. A wellness-based leadership show might pick health and fitness, mental health, business and management, and education, self-improvement. So you pick the main category, and then you've got your subcategory. The goal is to help the algorithm triangulate your identity so that you can show up across related topics and listener profiles. Now, the third thing that we want to do here is match your metadata. Your categories are not as strong if your metadata does not back them up. So these are things like your titles, your descriptions, your subtitles, your tags. All of these should use natural language that reinforces your category. So if your show is in entrepreneurship, you should be using words like startup or founder or scaling or growth or brand or business or strategy, those kinds of words. That way, every single element of your show is telling the same story, and it's telling it to the listener as well as to the algorithm. And having that consistency is the thing that will help get you charted. Everyone wants to rank in the charts, but here are some of the secrets of exactly how to do that. So I hope you've been taking some notes, and if you haven't, feel free to go back to the beginning of this episode when you have more time and write down some notes as you're going through. This is something that's a little bit newer to the podcasting world. It's the SEO side for LLM, which is your large language models in terms of podcast recommendations. I want to share with you this a little bit because this is totally new and it's something that is not being talked about a whole lot yet, but it's something that is really important. It's AI-driven search. We have in the past have had our platforms like Apple and Spotify and YouTube discover and help discover shows through things like downloads and ratings and, reviews a little bit, but not really so much, but mostly those metrics of completion rate and downloads and number of ratings on a show. The thing is today is that discovery is not just based on those things anymore. Your LLMO, which is your large language model optimization, reads your show notes and your transcripts and your titles and your categories together, and together it decides what your show is about. It's the same way that ChatGPT or Perplexity or Gemini or Notebook LM understands your text. So here's what this means for you. Using transcripts is really important and it's becoming an SEO goldmine. Your episode titles need to sound natural and not stuffed with keywords, which is also an SEO faux pas. Like it's something you just shouldn't do in SEO is stuff your episode titles with keywords, but people do it all the time. And your show description should also answer the question, who is this for and why does it matter? If you've been here along for this series, you're going to know how much I love this question. It's the foundation of every single podcast that I start. Who's the show for? What is it about? And why should they care? So it's the same kind of thing here. And then most importantly to all of this, your categories is where AI learns where to file you. So if a listener says or puts into a ChatGPT or a Gemini something like, find me a podcast that teaches solopreneurs how to grow without burning out, the system starts to look for content that is overlapping between categories like business, entrepreneurship, and health and fitness. So if you've positioned your show with those, that is where you start to appear. And if you haven't, then your show isn't the one that comes up. We're starting to see this shift and this move away from keyword search into context search. And your categories are the cornerstone of that context. So here's the main takeaway that I want you to take away from this episode today is that categories are not just labels for your show. They're levers, they're buckets, they're how the algorithm knows and how AI knows exactly where to place you. When you use them strategically, they help you rank faster, get recommended more often, and help you attract the right audience from day one. So if you've been treating your categories like an afterthought, this is your sign today to go back and take a look at them and make sure they make the most amount of sense for the content that you are creating and the audience that you are targeting. In 2025, AI is not just listening to your words, it's also reading your metadata. And if you want step-by-step guidance on exactly how to do this, grab my podcast launch blueprint. There's actually a bump up after that. I think it's about $7 or something like that, where you can grab my optimized titles and show description document, and it'll take you through exactly how to do this. So you can find that link in the episode notes below. I'm curious about your thoughts though. Have you thought about this? Is this something that you are going to put more time and energy into? Or is it something that feels overwhelming that we need to break down even further? Either way, let me know in the comments below if you're watching on YouTube or Spotify. And if you're listening on any other podcast app, just send me a message, send me a DM, or send us an email. I love to hear from you. I love your questions, and I'm here for all of your answers. And they could turn into future podcast episodes. So with that, thank you so much. And I will see you same time, same place next week with even more information on your podcast launch process. Bye for now.